This is Beyond the Resume, the podcast that brings you the stories, advice, and insights behind some of the most successful people in real estate. Beyond the Resume is brought to you by Jackson Lucas Executive Search, the industry leader in human capital solutions. Here is Chris Papa and Lisa Flicker.
Jim, thanks for coming on the podcast. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Chris. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. So you are the acting president and CEO. Are you acting like a president and a CEO at Century Housing?
I think I'm acting so well, I'll deserve an Emmy next year.
So you were, well, I guess, can you tell the world about Century Housing?
Century Housing is a little unique. Actually, I guess you shouldn't modify unique, should you? It's either unique or you're not. But anyway, we are a large community development financial institution. For those that don't know what that is a federally recognized lender. Most are nonprofits, but not all. And in fact, there are even community development CDFI banks and credit unions are what is called a CDFI loan fund. We are a nonprofit and we lend. Our area of expertise and focus is affordable housing. There are other CDFIs that do small business and other parts of community development, but we are focused on affordable housing. Last year, the lending team did about $450 million, and that's only in California. So we are one of the largest CDFI lenders in the country in terms of loan volume, but we're only doing it in one state as opposed to nationally. Now, what else is Century? Century is also a developer, affordable housing developer, and has been for 25 years, I think. And they are, in terms of developer size, they've certainly done some significant projects, but total size, they are a lot smaller than Bridge Housing, where I was prior to Century. Now, the other thing Century is a service provider. We have a large service arm called Oasis. I think it's been 20 plus years ago, Century was awarded about 25 acres at the former Long Beach Naval Station. A lot of that was base housing. Some of that base housing has been rehabilitated and some of it has been torn down and developed into new LIHTC housing. The rehabilitated housing is primarily leased to partner service providers who they master lease it for the service populations that they have. A lot of it has to be for, just because it's a former Navy base, a lot of it is focused on homeless veterans, but not totally. And eventually the build-up plan is actually to take down all of the old base housing and replace it with newer projects, but that's going to be still another 10 years probably to get all those phases done. So being CEO of Century, you're really CEO of three different kinds of corporations, which definitely adds to the entertainment value and the interest of value, though it can also add to the headache value too.
I read about the history of Century Housing. I think it's pretty fascinating. I don't know if you want to enlighten the audience of how Century Housing was formed.
That is definitely unique. When Caltrans did their usual short condemnation of a lot of neighborhoods in order to be able to create what's called the Century Freeway down in Los Angeles, a lot of folks got together and sued them. The judge happened to be very sympathetic to them. And when the project was done, the judge awarded the plaintiffs it was something like, he asked Caltrans, how much do you have left from this project? And I think it was around 250 million. And he said, fine, you're going to, seed a housing organization with that money. So it was an incredibly strong healthy start for an organization, right? I mean, who gets to start a nonprofit with an amount like that? Now, some of the history I'm a little unclear about, but at first, Century was actually an arm of state housing and community development here in California. About 30 years ago, and again, I'm a little unclear on the history, and I'm not sure what the impetus was, but about 30 years ago, Century was de-annexed from the state and became its own C3, standalone from C3. So for 30 years, we've been a nonprofit now, but the actual history of Century Housing goes back a little farther.
Well, you've been in housing for more than 30 years, right? Or maybe around
Yes, I've been.
you spent your whole career in housing. How did you, like, as a young James Mather? I don't know, you were known as a younger, but like, did you always envision yourself to be in housing? Did you have a instead of comic books, you were looking through the different housing publications?
Well, part of how I paid for college was doing construction work on what were redevelopment agency funded rehabilitations and basically turning old buildings into new housing. And that kind of planted the seed of an idea about public private partnership. But I was an English major in college. When I got out of college, I went to work in publishing.
Oh, yeah.
I was dirt bike editor for a motorcycle magazine for a while, but I was also editor. And then I was an editor of books that were histories of US and Canadian cities and counties. And the business model was to go in, get the Chamber of Commerce to basically sponsor the book. And there were salesmen who would sell ads to the chamber members, and those ads would be, like called Partners in Progress at the end of the book. And then you'd hire a local historian to write the book. So
Yeah.
editing those books really kind of solidified my interest in sort of in urban form and function. And after a few years, realizing how poorly paid publishing is and just wanting to do something bigger anyway, I went to the urban planning school, what at the time was the architecture and urban planning school at UCLA, got my master's in urban planning. And from there, I went so at the time, I was actually also pretty equally interested in the sort of environmental resource planning aspects of things, the birds and bunnies side, and would have been quite happy doing something there. But I was able to get a job with a real estate consulting firm in Los Angeles that did, it's economics, real estate economics. We had almost every redevelopment agency in the county of Los Angeles, which meant about 60, 70 redevelopment agencies as our clients, including the big ones, including LACRA and the county Community Development Commission at the time. We were negotiating ground leases for things like, well, I think when it was built, it was called Library Tower or First Interstate Tower, maybe. And now I think it's the US Bank Tower. We helped the county negotiate on what became the Disney Center, the Disney Concert Hall. We renegotiated ground leases at Marina Del Rey for LA County and things. At some point, though, I wanted to not be a consultant and be more involved in seeing projects through from end to end. I got into local government in the Bay Area and did some things like with home funding. When home funding first came out, I formed what was the first home consortium in California, certainly, to bring money into the group of cities in Alameda County that didn't get their own entitlements. It was only Berkeley and Oakland that got their own entitlements. All the other cities had to band together. So an interesting thing there is that the first year, the amount that Alameda County gets in home funding right now is almost the same as we got in 1993 when the program first came out. When it first came out, it seemed like a pretty significant number to have. But, you look at the importance of home funding now, it's so much less.
Why is that?
It was a step in the right direction back then.
Why do you think it's so much less now?
Republicans. It's been up and down, right? There were some increases during the Democratic years, but then Republicans came in and just started cutting back everything at HUD. And then it never got completely restored. I think also, back when home was first introduced, LIHTC pricing was probably still around 40, 45, 50 cents on the dollar. So as LIHTC pricing grew, home funding became less important. So I don't know. I mean, that's sort of I haven't really thought about it a lot other than blaming one political party mostly. So then I got into local government, did those things. And then I was like, well, it's nice to do these things, but we have this very small amount of money to deal with. And I think it was John Dillinger who was quoted, "Why does he rob banks? Because that's where the money is." Now, I didn't go rob banks. I decided to go get into banking because I saw that as pretty much an unlimited amount of funding to put towards community development. At the time, community development banking was still fairly new and in its early growth stages. And so the banks were hiring people from nonprofits. They were hiring people out of local government, state government, and there was a lot of flexibility and creativity you could bring to the job. And basically, every time I left a bank, it was because somebody had clamped down on the creativity or flexibility that I could provide. And eventually, after the big recession, every bank clamped down, and banking became just no fun anymore. That's when I went into the CDFI world, Housing Trust Silicon Valley. It was pretty small back then, but we had a lot of flexibility. And while I was there, we became the first nonprofit CDFI to get an S&P rating, which allowed us to go to investors and start getting more money, more capital. And that's always been we actually never had to go to the public markets like so many CDFIs did after us, because all we needed to do was, what we were doing was we were going to the tech companies and saying, "We're rated, you can lend us money now." And a lot of them did.
Huh. Yeah.
But
How did you learn finance? You did history. I mean, now you're in lending, banking,
well, real estate economics, my first job out of grad school, that was a serious education in number crunching. I worked for a man named Alan Coton, who as far as I know, he is still working, but he came out of the ERA, the Economic Research Associates, to start his own firm, which at the time when I was there was called Coton, Regan and Mushley, and they became a real powerhouse in real estate economics. And he wasn't always the most pleasant of bosses, but boy, I learned a lot working with him, and definitely am grateful to what I learned while I was there. Which included, which wasn't just the numbers of how you put a capital stack, but it was also looking at feasibility and markets and negotiations, because we did a lot of negotiating with big developers on behalf of redevelopment agencies. So, but from there, so I had a very good background. And in fact, in grad school, a lot of what I did was quantitatively oriented, because that's what interested me. I love being an English major, but that's not really how my head works. My head is actually much more, when I started getting back into numbers again, I went to college thinking I was going to be a math major, but I just got seduced by being able to read great literature all the time. So, but when I got out of my undergrad and started getting back into numbers again, it's like, oh yeah, this makes so much more sense. But so I had a really strong quantitative background. Then when I went to the public sector, I was almost immediately thrown into bonds. We didn't do all of the county's bonds, but we did all the county's bonds related to housing. Back then there were a lot of single family mortgage revenue bonds being done, because the single family mortgages, market rate single family mortgage was somewhere in the 14% range, and we could do a tax exempt bond and bring it down to 9 or 10%. And we started, I worked with Gene Slater. He was our financial advisor. I learned an awful lot from Gene Slater on multifamily bonds, on public issuance and private placement. We used Oric as our bond counsel. Stan Dirks was my initial bond counsel, but then moved to Perry Israel. I mean, Perry's still around. Stan's long retired. Tom Downey, who was at Jones Hall at the time, but I think ended up at Oric. And those are the guys that sort of predate Justin Cooper, who's now the preeminent bond attorney at Oric, certainly at least housing bond attorney at Oric. So I had really some very strong teachers around bond finance. And in fact, what we did we actually created a small multifamily bonds were not as easily placeable back then unless they were rated, but it was hard to get them rated, especially if they were for affordable. So we actually created a JPA back then for cities in the Bay Area. And I did that with Gene Slater and Tom Downey. And this, I don't know that predates CSCDA, but it predated CMFA. We actually did one or two deals through there, but then I changed jobs and the sort of bond. I changed jobs and kind of nobody really picked it up after that. But also the bond market was changing. When I changed jobs, Bank of America was just starting to do private placement bonds because they realized, hey, it's pretty good business. So there wasn't so much need for the JPA, but actually for the JPA we created. I think, people were using at that point, I think CMFA had come into the picture as well as CSCDA. ABAG was there, of course, too. That was before that was before the problems at ABAG's bond group were discovered.
You went to Bridge, and you're on the investment side as opposed to like the lending side, right? I mean, was there a difference in how people?
Well, I think what carried over was the capital markets experience. I think that's why a big reason Cynthia Parker hired me. I mean, as well as just my winning personality, of course. But
Of course.
Housing Trust was the first CDFI to get rated. Bridge was the first nonprofit housing developer to get rated. And then, so Cynthia brought me on basically with one of my big goals was, hey, let's use our rating and go raise some money, which we did. So December of 2020, we issued the $100 million general obligation bond. And given what the rates were in December of 2020, around 3%, we wished we had issued 200 million. But anyway, so so capital markets has always been one of my interests, particularly in thinking. So I went from the county, I went to a bank because that's where the money is. And then it's like, well, look at the capital markets. There's even more money there. How do we get affordable housing into capital markets? And started with, let's get rated. Once we get rated, let's go to the capital markets. CDFIs had done some issuance by the time Bridge had, so maybe that warmed up the markets a little bit for social impact investing. But my education of the investors that we had investor meetings with was, here's what a CDFI does. A CDFI takes your money and they go out and lend to nonprofit developers who are not rated. If you invest in us, all of our money goes into projects that are sponsored by an actual rated housing developer. In that sense, we are actually a safer bet. So come invest in us. And in fact, our $100 million issuance was oversubscribed at least 2 to 1.
How did you? You said that when you started, you were on working construction, and you saw the public-private partnership. I mean, obviously, it feels like you're very mission driven. You're trying to get all this money into affordable housing. I mean, it feels like you're mission driven. Like, where did that come from? Did you always have that in you, or is over the years you just saw how effective this could be?
Yeah, I guess I've always had it in me. I mean, and I guess it was there looking for an outlet. I mean, being a dirt bike editor at a motorcycle magazine could hardly be described as mission driven.
No, no.
But I was young and unfocused at the time, and it was fun. So that's what I did. But I think the idea of, I've always been someone to root for the underdog. I don't know. When I was in college, I didn't just do construction. I also tutored in local schools in which was in what was, could be considered a fairly rough inner city where I was. So trying to, I mean, I found ways to try to do my part. I volunteered, I worked on what was I worked to establish the Connecticut Fund for the Environment. So I've always had this I guess I've always had some kind of mission orientation. This has been a very good outlet for me. I mean, several of my English major colleagues went on to do junk bonds on Wall Street because because it was the 80s, and that's where a lot of English majors from Yale ended up. They took one or two classes in economics and then went work for an investment bank.
And now you're doing a lot of board work I've seen. And that's how, I mean, how did you get introduced to Century? Did you ever picture like you'd be you started as a board member, right? Did you think?
Yes, I did.
Did you think you'd be the president within 6 months?
Century has had some turnover at the very top. I was recruited for the board in December of last year. My first board meeting was in February. I became interim CFO in May when the long-term CFO retired. And then the interim CEO, who had stepped off the board to be interim CEO, had enough, and he left in June, and they asked me to step in as interim CEO. So no, nothing at all that I anticipated. Nothing, not a path I would have chosen, but I am a sucker for people that need me, or pets.
You've been called, as they say. You've been called.
Yeah. So, and frankly, I think I was the best option they had at the time. So I think, and I'm happy to be doing it. I'm also going to be happy when I retire.
Yeah. What's in store now for Century? Over, what plans do you have? These three businesses within the business.
Well, Century's really. I mean, here's the thing: is that I've been through a lot of turnover at top levels. I mean, I've been through company. I mean, going back to Bank of America. Bank of America got taken over by a bank based out of North Carolina. I mean, who knew that was going to be the result of that supposed merger of equals? That was a little traumatic for the folks in California. I mean, it's turned out fine, but it was certainly a big shock. I've been through other changes at the top level, and the thing is that, I mean, sure, Bridge Housing does not have as much money as Bank of America, and neither does Century, but both of them are such strong organizations, not because of who the CEO is. Not that I want to take credit away from a CEO either, but it's because of who works there and the fact that they show up to work every day and get the job done. So I want to give credit to the folks who are actually doing the real work on the ground. Whether it's building new housing, whether it's lending to affordable housing developers, or whether it's providing the services that our tenants need in order to move towards greater independence.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Jim, you look really calm, cool, and collective sitting there in Walnut Creek, but you just sat on the hot seat. Oh! So get ready to sweat. You ready for a question? I'll give you an easy one. Do you have a book or podcast recommendation?
So in the questions that got sent, it says, what's your favorite book? My favorite book of all time is Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon.
Cool.
Which is probably not something a lot of people listening to this are going to run out and read. So I'll switch more to the business side of things. Two of my favorite books. My absolute favorite book on business is Becoming Trader Joe. Cool. By Joe Colomb, who was the founder of Trader Joe's. I think it has more sensible, rational management and entrepreneurial advice than all of the other books that have been put out by Harvard MBAs over the last 20 years, by far. Another book that I thought was really good, and I think still carries weight, is Getting to Yes, which I read in grad school when it was relatively new, but I think gives you basically any business, you're always negotiating something. And I think Getting to Yes is a very good framework for figuring out how to do it efficiently and trying to make it a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I never read the Trader Joe one. I'm gonna check that one out. Do you? So yeah, I'm sure you live or have lived or continue to live a pretty hectic life, and being a president of a company, I'm sure there's a lot of people demanding time from you. Do you have anything that you do during like a lot of folks have some like a morning practice or routine or something during the day where they kind of center themselves? Do you have anything like that?
I think my big morning ritual is my pour over coffee.
Well, it takes time. You got to pour it. You got to maybe grind it, then pour it over. It's like a whole, yeah, it's a ritual. Yeah. It takes
And
time.
then I have like, I think I'm up to about 10 different kinds of coffee makers. I've got Turkish, Vietnamese, a hand pull espresso machine, probably 4 different kinds of cones,
Right.
the stovetop, the mocha pot thing.
Mhm.
So, and I have found that it's just fun. It's fun and sort of, frees my mind to think about, oh, what grind size should I use today? That sort of thing. Cooking, actually, in general, is also another really good way I find of clearing my head and just sort of getting into the moment. So, but you did say morning ritual. I try to exercise some in the morning, but that's not very consistent because I often have stuff just, calls happening too early to really get in something good.
I'm a big fan of cooking as well. I love cooking. It's like doing something with my hands. I don't do a lot with my hands anymore, in front of the computer so much. It's like, it's just good to get out of myself. Now, I'm sure you've hired a lot of people throughout your career. A lot of people listening to this podcast, watching this podcast might be interested in working for you or another company like yours. Like, what do you look for when you're hiring someone?
Mission is pretty important. I mean, if it's, and it really depends on the position. We just hired a CFO. I think, frankly, the last 3 CFOs that I've either hired or been involved with the hiring of have not come out of affordable housing or even nonprofits. Um, and I've found that is fine if they have a sense of mission. And often what it is, I mean, actually, it's been at least 2 of them have been, I made my money. I want to do something. I want to give back now if I can. And I've had great. I think that's been very successful from the CFO side. If I'm looking at, who else have I hired, or what else have I hired? I've hired for on the capital markets side at Bridge. My hires tended to be, well, I mean, I look for intelligence, of course. I look for nimbleness, quick mindedness, ability to adapt. I prefer a calm demeanor, though finding that is a little difficult, I'd say. I probably have what most people would say is an anxiety deficit. Um, so it's hard to find people that match that in terms of my demeanor. But I also want people who are kind of well, somewhat well-rounded. I mean, it's not an absolute must. Um, I want people who have done something more than just crunch numbers um, all the time. Uh, and if it's on the housing development side, damn, I want somebody who's worked with their hands and actually knows how to put something together. I mean, I think it's one of the problems with policymakers. We are subject to policymakers who have never built a darn thing, let alone managed a property. And so they come up with the unworkable priorities and unworkable parameters for you to actually build and manage in. And then the other last thing is probably no assholes or prima donnas.
My father's an engineer, and he always says the architects, create things, but you have to figure out how to actually put it together as engineers. It sounds
My
like the
favorite
policymakers.
architect, my favorite architect ever was actually someone who, before he went to architecture school, was a construction manager.
There you go.
So he could design things that he knew he could design pretty things that he knew could be built efficiently.
Now you mentioned a number of mentors you worked with throughout your career. Are there any other mentors which has had the most impact upon you, or are there any mentors that have had an impact upon you that you want to haven't mentioned so far?
Well, my high school Latin teacher, James Robinson, he was a really
Latin.
good guy. Helped me keep a little more focused in high school than I would have otherwise. Maybe that was the study of Latin
Where'd you
too.
go to high school? Where'd you grow up?
San Diego.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, he was. I don't know that it was a public high school. I was the first one to take 3 years of Latin there. So, but out in the professional world, yeah, I mean, there's Jim Francis, who hired me at Union Bank, which doesn't exist anymore. And Jim's been sort of off the grid for a while now, but there was a lot. I mean, Jim and I look at Jim a lot as a peer, partly because we're the same age, but I learned a lot from him too, especially I think about banking and, how to manage in a bank. Yeah, and I think I mentioned, I mean, the ones earlier that I mentioned that, really helped me get into bonds and capital markets stuff, and then going back to Alan Coden, my first job out of grad school was really, those were really shaping for me.
Awesome. Well, Jim, it was great to meet you. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Resume, a Jackson Lucas podcast where we take a deep dive into the career journeys of some of the top minds in real estate and equip you with the knowledge to move forward in your path towards the success you've envisioned. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Beyond the Resume. We're grateful for your support. All episodes of Beyond the Resume are brought to you by Jackson Lucas, building inclusive and diverse businesses through talent acquisition. Visit us at jacksonlucas.com.